What a change, you really was a bit the hawkish girl that once you were. She may not remember me, but I remember.
We never said a love was evergreen, or a love sweetly ecstasy. But please promise me that sometime
No more talk of darkness, forget these wide-eyed fields. I'm here, nothing can harm you. My words will warm and calm you. Let me be your freedom. Let daylight dry your tears. I'm here, with you beside you, to guard you and to guide you.
Promise me that
Some time ago, I decided that I had better do something about my personal history. So I taped all of my thoughts throughout the years, and Laura transcribed it, and each one of my children have a copy of it. But now, I think we're going to review different parts of it, with different ones of my children reading those parts.
I've been asked to read the first part of my mother's history. She begins, "My mother was a daughter of Rachel Tamer Hamblin, who was the daughter of Jacob Vernon Hamblin, and of course this history has been written and is well known since he was a missionary to the Lamanite people in Utah's early settlement days. Tamer married William Thomas Stewart, my grandfather, and their first child, Maud Rachel, was my mother. When mother was about 2 years of age, her mother and newly born brother died with erysipelas, leaving she and her father alone. Her father later married Fanny Little and Mary Udall, these women both being wives to grandfather at the same time, these being the days of polygamy. There were 2 girls born to Fanny and grandfather, and then a large family to he and Mary Udall. Mother, being the oldest of the family, helped to raise the children as her father went on 2 different missions to New Zealand to the Maori people. Each mission was about 3 years long, this being at the time his children were young and his family growing. He left this large family with Mary. Fanny had died. Mary was a nurse and ran a millinery store and did many other things to earn a living, leaving much of the care of the children in the home to Maud. When she was in her early 20s, her stepmother's brother, George Udall, visited in their home, and as a result of the acquaintance, George and mother were married. They were married in the St. George Temple, but lived out in Fort Harriman, Utah, when their first child, Arland, was born. Father was teaching school there. They later built a home in Nephi, which is where the Udall family was from, and this lively home mother talked of often. Stewart was born in Nephi. Father and mother later moved to Eureka, where Dean was born, and their daughter, Rachel Adora, who died a few weeks after birth. Fabian and I were also born in Eureka. I was born on the 6th of February, 1913, the 6th child. My parents were active in the church and community and had a happy life together. At the time of my birth, Eureka was a thriving mining community, my father being an attorney with a law practice there. I remember our home in Eureka being on a corner lot that seemed so big when I was small, even though it was a small yard. I remember my brothers tossing me off an outdoor building into heavy, deep snowdrifts in the wintertime. I also remember following my brothers to school one day, and the grounds were deserted and quiet. I remember standing to the side of the brick wall building, feeling very much alone and frightened, not knowing what to do. I could hear the whistle of a train in the distance. To this day, if it is quiet and I hear the distant train whistle, I have a feeling of being lonesome and sad. While we were still in Eureka, my father, having made a lot of money with his profession and with mining stock, and having an early background of being taught the principle of polygamy, decided that one wife was not enough for him, although polygamy had been outlawed and was not being practiced by the church at this time. Having a lot of money, he wanted more than just one wife and a family of children, so he purchased a home in Lehi, Utah County, along the state highway there. At that time, it was a very nice brick home. He settled mother and his children there. I was 4, and he went on to Salt Lake, where he later married a very young woman. The marriage did not last long, and he spent the rest of his life a lonely, broken man. Mother received a financial settlement from him that was very good at that time after much bitter court battles, and this she took very good care of and used to raise her family. Father pursued his law practice in Salt Lake. We would visit him there, going up on what we called the interurban transportation system, and would spend an afternoon or day or several days. Father had a keen mind and was almost a genius in some ways, but in other ways he lacked common sense. He sang for many years in the Tabernacle Choir. When he was older, he studied Shakespeare, French, and other subjects. He liked to dress well and look well. He was generous with people, but not smart with his money. Mother often told us that if Father had been truly repentant and had come back to the family, she would have welcomed him. But he didn't ever want to admit his mistake, and so they didn't spend any time together after their divorce. We took her to his funeral, and she didn't even recognize him. Neither Father nor Mother ever said anything against each other to us children. When Father was in his 80s, he was hit by a car while crossing a street. Since he was old and since Mother was staying at the time with Aunt Alice, we took him into our home for his last 6 or 7 weeks and cared for him day and night. He was with us until he died and was buried in Lehi. Mother was a very intelligent, attractive, and wonderful person. She didn't work outside the home since there were few opportunities for women to do so. She spent her time sewing and cooking and keeping house and doing a lot to economize so that the money would last until she raised her family. She was very apt at making things do, and there wasn't a scrap of material or a piece of food or anything in the house that she didn't use to its utmost. With her exceptional sewing talent, she made us all look as though she had spent a lot of money on our clothes. She was also very careful about her appearance. My childhood seemed happy because Mother made a good home for us and was a kind, loving mother. She taught us the principles of the gospel and how to be honest, upright citizens. I remember that she was often very sad. She would be crying and we wouldn't understand why. I don't think she ever recovered emotionally from the divorce. With all the work she had as a child, I don't think she had a happy life except when she and Father were together. I attended the Franklin School in Lehi, which is about half a mile east of our home on the highway. In the 5th grade, we went into town to finish our education. We walked 1.5 miles each way every day. We seldom missed school, and it was very cold facing the north wind that last mile home. Mother always had something warm for us to eat and was always there to welcome us. I attended church in the Lehi 3rd Ward in a one-room building. There used to be wires crisscrossed through the benches with curtains hanging to divide off the classrooms until they later added on a stage and classrooms. When I was 16, my brother Fabian was involved in an accident in Bingham Canyon. He was in the Salt Lake Hospital for 2 months until he died. The day before he died, we visited him in the hospital. I could see that he was gravely ill. He spoke to me then and kidded me a little. Mother instructed us to go home. She stayed with him. I slept alone in my room that night but couldn't sleep. I rolled and tossed all night long thinking about the many things that Fabian and I had done in our childhood and of the good times that we'd had together and the many things that we'd shared, and this went on all night. In the morning, about 6 a.m., still being dark, I slipped out of bed onto my knees and asked my Heavenly Father to either help Fabian to get well very soon or to take him. And as I got back into bed, the nervousness and worry suddenly left me, and I felt calm and assured as I fell to sleep. Later that morning, we received a call from Salt Lake telling us that Fabian had died that morning at 6 a.m. I don't know whether the Lord took him at that time because I asked him to, or whether the Lord had set that time for him to go. But I do know that I struggled with him all night long because of what he was enduring, and that when he was gone, I received this calmness. The feelings of that night have stayed with me all my life. Despite this, because Fabian was very dear to me, his death was painful. It took a great deal to get over it, but it prepared me for the future because every death I experienced after that, losing brothers, mother, and husbands, was easier to overcome. Having gone through it with Fabian, I could always say, this too will pass, and it eased my pain.
During Fabian's stay at the hospital, my mother spent what time she could between there and home. Not having transportation of our own, and transportation then not being what it is now, she would have to stay 2 or 3 days at a time in Salt Lake, and I would be at home sometimes alone. One night was when I was home alone for one night when I was home alone, the night Virgil Dean, a boy came with whom I had been going steady for a year and was very much in love with, came to see me. As a result of this night, I became pregnant out of wedlock. There was a marriage ceremony performed later on, and I went to Cananea, Sonora, Mexico to stay with my brother Stuart and his wife, who were living there, while he was working as a mining engineer until my baby was born. March 1st, I delivered a son, which I later named Virgil Dean Shelton after his father. Dean's father and I never lived together, his family, especially his mother, being very much opposed to us trying to make any sort of a chance for a marriage. My mother could not afford to help. Consequently, we drifted apart, and I was left to raise my child by myself and with the help of my mother. With the help of my father, I obtained a divorce from Virgil. Soon after the death of Fabian, my brother Dean lost his leg in a train accident. Mother had also gone through a very hard time trying to keep my oldest brother Orland through a nervous breakdown, probably caused or at least influenced by the breakup of father and mother's marriage. So Mother had many difficulties through this period. By this time, all of Mother's financial resources had been exhausted, and it was during the Depression when people found it very hard to find a way to make a living. My older brothers by now had all been married and gone away from home. Within a year after I divorced Virgil, I started keeping company with Harry Gilbert Manning, whom I had known through school. His father was married to Esther Ann College, who was a hard-working woman who could work in the fields like the men and attend to her family and church duties as well. Dad Manning, also named Harry, was a rough man who was not very religious and would never go to church. After his wife died, he decided that he had not done the right things in his life, and even though he was in his 60s, he decided to do something about it. His wife, Eddie, as he called her, visited him several times after her death and told him that he must do something about being advanced in the priesthood and become worthy to go to the temple and get their work done. Dad asked me to help him to do some genealogy research, and we found out a little bit about his heritage. Not long after that, Dad Manning went to the temple and received his endowments, and we did the work for his wife, Esther Ann. Some of the children were sealed to them at that time. Soon after this, he became ill and had a series of strokes and died. The first time Harry Gilbert and I decided to keep company was at a party. He asked me if he could take me home, and so we started going together, he being 3.5 years older than I. We went together for about a year and then were married. We decided it would be a help to Mother and certainly a help to us if we lived in the home with her. Many people at this time had to live with their parents because it was so difficult to make a living. Mother couldn't keep the house and 5 acres up, so was very happy for us to be with her. Of course, we were happy too, because she was very good to us. I told my mother often previous to that, for all that she had done for me and for our family, who would always have a home with me wherever I was. But as it turned out, we never did leave that home during her lifetime. To this home next came Neil, my second son, then Fabian J., then Luann, our first little girl, then Jenna Lynn, then Laura Lee, 6 children in all. Between Luann and Jenna, and then again between Jenna and Laura, I had 2 miscarriages. I was having some health problems, but we all seemed happy together. Harry at the time of our marriage was inactive in church, but I attended whenever I could between the birth of my children. It wasn't that Harry wasn't a good husband. He was very kind and a good husband. He loved me dearly, and I did him. He was very willing to work hard, which he did, in order for us to have the finances for a comfortable home. He paid all the expenses of the utilities and taxes, did all of the work on the land, and did everything that he could for us to have the things we needed. I feel at this time we made things very pleasant for Mother, although she worked helping with the children, doing many things for us. It was a happy time of our lives. The children enjoyed Grandma, and she enjoyed them. They were just like her own, and we got along very well. As the children grew older, things picked up financially, and we were able to have many of the comforts and even some luxuries of life. Harry did a lot of work remodeling the home with the help of his father, who was somewhat of a carpenter, and we would finish it and decorate it. We had many, many happy hours in that home. In the meantime, my next to the oldest brother, Stuart, who was living in Seattle, had a heart attack and died, leaving a wife and 4 children. This left 2 brothers surviving in my family, Dean and Arland. Mother had given birth to 1 daughter besides myself, but she had died in infancy. So Mother lived to see 3 of her 6 children gone. As the years went by, Harry gradually decided to do something about the church, and he started to go with me and started to teach the children by example the principles of the gospel. Harry was a very good man. He was a sportsman, a hunter, and a good athlete. Sports was a lot of his life. He enjoyed being a spectator as well as taking part. As the boys grew older, he took them to ball games and supported them in all their athletics in school, took them hunting, and was a real father to them. We both started to hold positions in church, in the meantime having gone to the temple and receiving our endowments and being sealed to each other. Dean was sealed to Harry along with Neil and Jay. Luann, Jenna, and Laura were all born in the covenant. Some of the positions we held in church were on the building committee, which we helped to raise funds for a new chapel. The genealogical committee, which we worked together and spent many happy hours and many times going to Salt Lake to do temple work together. Harry was a counselor in the presidency of the Elders Quorum and later Elders Quorum president. Later on, he was a counselor in the Third Ward bishopric. Around this time, as the children were teenage and growing up, Harry's health started to fail. And after I ceased bearing children and had surgery, my health improved greatly. Harry had suffered from tularemia, rabbit fever, when he was younger, and that seemed to leave him susceptible to arthritis and rheumatism. Mother's health started to fail by the time the older children were starting families of their own. We took care of her in our home. Up until the last 2 years of her life, her mind was very clear. She was a very kind, considerate person. I don't think that most of her life was very happy, but I think when we took over the responsibility of the home and property, and she remained with us, that these were the happiest years of her life. We cared for her until her death.
time, Jenna was married, leaving just Laura at home. Harry and I remained very active in the church. I had been president of the MIA, counselor in the Relief Society, and we were both actively engaged in rearing our family and serving the Lord. Soon after this time, the freeway came through Lehigh, taking part of our property. So we decided to sell the home and purchase another one. Over the years, we had paid Mother for the home, so it belonged to us. We purchased a home in Lehigh 7th Ward on 5th North between 4th and 5th West. It was a very comfortable, more modern home. Harry's health was steadily progressing downhill, and I had decided, after Jay had returned from his mission, to go to licensed practical nursing school, feeling that maybe the time would come that I would have to make a living for us. I graduated as a licensed practical nurse from what was then the Central Utah Valley Vocational School in Provo, and secured a position at the Utah State Training School in American Fork, an institution for the mentally retarded. I worked as a nurse in the medical area there. Harry was and had been for many years employed at the brick plant north of Lehigh, General Refractories, a silica brick plant. He had been a brick molder and was very good at his trade, and had made good money until his health had started to fail, and he then took a job there as a night watchman. He had to work many Sundays as a watchman. Laura was married after we had been in the new home a few years, and Harry and I were left home alone for the first time in our marriage. Had it not been for his poor health, this could have been a very happy time in our lives because we were financially better off than we had been. We had grown spiritually to the extent that we felt we were doing all we could to keep the Lord's commandments. Our children were all well and healthy and happy in homes of their own. And even though I was working, and so was Harry, we spent many happy hours together. It had taken Harry many years to develop into the kind of a man he had become, and probably for myself too. But I noticed a great change in Harry from the time we were married to the giant of a man he became. We both did a lot of growing and maturing during our years of marriage, as I guess all couples do. We had a lot of hard times. We had a lot of hard times. We had a lot of hard times financially for quite a few years, but we always had the comforts and necessities of life which we needed. We both became more mature and happy as we became active in the church, and we come to appreciate each other more as time went on. The little while which we had alone together in our home gave us time to reflect back on our life together and a chance to express to each other our feelings for one another. We spent many hours on our knees thanking our Heavenly Father for all the blessings which He had brought to us in our life. On Mother's Day in 1968, Harry had gone to work at the brick plant. He hadn't felt good that morning. He had awakened me early because he had a lovely silverware set to give to me that he had picked out. It was very beautiful, and I was very pleased. He had spent a lot of time going back and forth to the store to get everything I'd need for the children as they dropped in on Mother's Day. It seemed that he had a lot of people downtown that he wanted to talk to, and lots of visiting which he wanted to do. On this morning, when he didn't feel good, I said that maybe he shouldn't go to work. But he said yes, he'd go. He never did miss work, no matter what. The privilege of working and holding down a regular job meant a lot to him because he had gone through times when jobs were scarce, and had made up his mind that if he ever had a regular job, he would never complain. He'd be glad he had work, and he would always be there. He had been conscientious about providing for his family and about keeping all his bills paid. He didn't like to owe anyone, and he would not owe anyone. So he did go to work, but he called later in the morning and said he was in worse pain. He didn't know whether it was from his arthritis, which he constantly suffered with and was on medication for, or what was the problem. But soon he called and said that he thought we better get someone to come and take his place at work, and that he'd better come home. Laura, who was visiting from Brigham City, and I went up to get him, and I could see that he was in a lot of pain, having chest pains, and so we got him in the car and took him directly to Dr. Eddington. The doctor came out of the car and checked him and said to take him to the hospital. Harry and I rode over to the hospital together, and even though he was in great distress, he expressed again his love for me. After reaching the hospital and the doctor checking him, it was concluded that he was having a severe heart attack. The doctor was very attentive, and we contacted all the family and the bishop. The bishop came right over, and in fact came 3 times in the course of the day to check on us. By 10 o'clock that night, Harry was gone. It seemed that no matter what was done for him medically, no matter how much his family would like to have kept him, and no matter that we had the power of the priesthood with him that day, it seemed to be the time that the Lord wanted to take him home. Of course, it was a great shock to the family. This brought the time in my life when I had to use all the willpower I had to adjust to this great change in my life. I had always been a person who liked to keep busy. I had worked continuously since before my nurse's training, and I had also held down various church positions in 2 wards. Also, I had been active in the LPN Association. When my children were in high school, I had been president of the PTA. In addition to these, I did a lot of sewing for my family and handwork. I did a lot of quilting and different crafts. I had always been very busy and very active, but until Harry died, I didn't realize that I had been happy doing these things because I had him. I was not alone. He shared many of my interests, and he appreciated the many things I did, and I appreciated what he did. We were happy and content in our home and in our marriage, and that's why it was a joy to do all of the things I did. Suddenly, I didn't take much joy in any of the things which I would try to accomplish or do. I almost had to live from one day to the next. I continued to work now that it was necessary to earn my own living. We were not in debt in any way and owned our own home, so I was blessed to have been left in good financial position. I think the hardest thing was not having someone to share my thoughts with or my problems with. I continued on, and I had a social life with lady friends who were also alone. My children, of course, were all very good to me and did all they could to help. In the years previous to this, my brother Arland and my brother Dean had both died from heart attacks or heart conditions, so I was the sole survivor of my father and mother's children. This gives a person in this position quite a lonely feeling, knowing that they're the only one in their family left. Each of my children had lives of their own to live, and although I would spend time with them, there was only so much that children can do to help fill the loneliness of their mother. During this time, I reflected back through the years with Harry and our beautiful memories. It was assuring to know that we were sealed for time and eternity, and our children to us, to know that we both had tried, especially in later years, to do all we could to keep the commandments, to know that only through faithfulness would we receive forgiveness for our shortcomings, faults, and sins. We spent many happy hours together, and many wonderful things happened to make our lives happy. This was a great comfort to me. Harry was 58 when he died, and I was 55 at the time, and I wondered if I would spend the rest of my life alone. It didn't look like that would be such a bad thing to do. I know many people who had spent more years than that alone, but I would often in my prayers asked that I would either be able to adjust so that I could find a measure of happiness, or that if this was not possible, that I would not have to be alone. At one time, during the month of August, as I was leaving sacrament meeting, I got into a conversation with Warren Goltz, who had just lost his wife in February, and he was lonely and wasn't adjusting too well to being alone, and we shared these feelings and started keeping company. Our first date was with the bishop and his wife, and we knew that we enjoyed each other's company, and so we started to spend a lot of time together. I think that's where Laura comes in. Jenna.
One of the things we would do for a date was to go to an early morning session of the temple and then sit in the celestial room and talk of some of the things that were in our hearts. And then we would go to breakfast and return home in time for me to go to work on the afternoon shift. We continued to keep company, and gradually we could see that we were feeling a closeness for each other, and we began to talk about what it would be like if we were to join our lives. What would we do about our finances, our property, and anything else we felt like discussing, and we went over these things very thoroughly. We could see we were fast coming to a conclusion that we did want to unite our lives so that we might have the wonderful companionship that we both missed so much. However, this was a very emotional thing for both of us. We wanted to be true to our companions and to their trust in us. We both were undecided to a certain extent. I had a tight feeling in my chest, but within 3 days of fasting and praying about it, the tightness left, and a feeling of peace and calm came over me. I knew without a doubt that the things that Warren and I had planned met with my Father in Heaven's approval. I asked Warren to seek the same assurance, and he did. We were married in December. After our ceremony for time was performed in the Salt Lake Temple, we boarded a plane and went to Hawaii for our honeymoon. Warren had been on a mission there as a young man and had not had the opportunity to return. I had been to the islands on a tour with Harry and had seen how beautiful they were. No young girl or woman could have had a more beautiful courtship and honeymoon than I had with Warren. We visited 4 islands. Warren was happy to see the islands after so many years. We returned to Warren's home where we had moved my things. He carried me across the threshold and had red roses waiting for me. We knew then that our marriage would be a happy one. Warren soon received a call to be an ordinance worker in the Provo Temple. I was not called because I was still working, not yet having reached retirement age. I was officer of the day at the training school, a responsible position for which I received a good wage, and I enjoyed my work. We decided that I would continue on with this at least until I was 62. Warren had reached the age where he had given up being justice of the peace and the custodial work at the stake center. We thought that the work at the temple would be all that he needed to occupy his time. Also, we spent some time together each night at my work when he could be helpful, and he liked to see that I returned home safely each night at midnight. This was the pattern of our marriage for about 2 years, and then one day we went to have our temple recommends renewed. The bishop approached us with the suggestion that we go on a mission. He said that he had been strongly impressed to ask us. We explained that I wasn't of the age to retire, and that it would be more convenient for us if we waited for about 2 years, but that we would go depending on how he felt. He suggested to us that we go home and pray about it. So this we did, and we knew that the Lord wanted us to go then. We told our bishop, and before long we were called to serve for 18 months in Hawaii, of all places. The call was to proselyte. We had thought maybe that it would be to the visitor center, but it was to proselyte. And so in December 1973, just 2 years from our honeymoon, we were on a plane again for Hawaii, this time to the mission field. Our first assignment was on Kauai, working with inactive members and with part-member families. We also learned the discussions here. We were blessed to bring 4 people into the waters of baptism on that island. We then transferred to Maui. It was hard to leave the wonderful people on Kauai. We soon found Maui to be a special place too. There was more church activity there. We became closely associated with the members. After a few months on Maui, we received a call from President Crandall asking Warren if we would transfer over to the island of Oahu out at Laie for Warren to be the director of the visitor center for the remainder of our mission. So we had the wonderful privilege of being there and meeting the tourists that came. And although our contact with them was very short, we tried to do all we could so that we would want to hear more about the gospel, so that they would want to hear more about the gospel. It was different from proselyting, and we missed that excitement and joy, but there was satisfaction in this work too. It was nice to attend church in an area with so many faithful members. This is where we finished our mission and returned home in June. Most of Warren's and my grandchildren and children were at the airport to meet us as we came home, and what a joyful reunion that was. Warren was especially happy to be free of the allergies he had been plagued with in the islands, and within a few weeks of our return home, these problems all cleared up. None of this had stopped us from our labors in the mission field. Warren especially put a lot of time and energy and worry into the work. I did all I could to help him and do my part. We spent many hours proselyting and studying throughout our mission. We were very happy to know that the Lord had considered us worthy and given us the privilege of serving this mission. I had to take early retirement in order to go on the mission, so I did not return to employment after we came home. I turned 62 in the mission field and started drawing Social Security. After we spent a few months getting our home in order after the mission, we started at the Provo Temple as ordinance workers. We had taken time first to visit with loved ones, toured the East for sightseeing, visiting the new Washington Temple, and returning by October 1975. Warren was used to the temple work and easily adjusted back to it. I had a lot to learn, as all others do, but I am so happy and grateful to my Heavenly Father for the wonderful privilege and opportunity of laboring in His holy house. I received a blessing that I would have the health and ability to continue in this work, and I felt very blessed at the time for having the comforts, financial means, joy, and companionship that I had. I think this concludes Mother's personal history, and we've been asked to take a few minutes and tell some of our personal memories. My thoughts are not in any particular order, but there are things that I wished to express. Today is my 48th birthday, so it was 48 years ago today that Mother gave birth to me, Laura, her youngest daughter. We had a happy childhood. I had a happy childhood. Jenna and I were the youngest in the family, Jenna being 7 years younger than the next sister, Luann. And so she and I kind of were sisters together, almost like a separate younger family sometimes. I can remember getting tired of people commenting on the beautiful dresses that we had, that Mother had made, but they truly were works of art. We used to get a McCall's magazine, I guess monthly, and in it would be Betsy McCall, a paper doll, and she had these darling dresses, and Mother would copy those for Jen and I, and so we always were very well dressed. Mother was an excellent homemaker and an excellent seamstress and an excellent cook. She's also very efficient and organized. I remember when I was in my very early teens or preteens, Mother began working so that Jay could serve a mission to help out with the finances. And then after Jay completed his mission, she had been working as a cook at the Lehigh Hospital, and she decided to go to school at the vocational school and get her nursing degree. And so that time of our lives kind of changed from having a mother at home all the time to having a mother there just part of the time. But it was a good experience for me. Being the youngest child is probably the only way that I would have learned the responsibilities that I did. I remember once as a teenager talking back to Mother, and the minute those words came out of my mouth, I ran for the bathroom and shut the door and locked it. I knew that I was in big trouble. I remember her very calmly and very sternly coming to the door and saying, "Open that door." And I think she had to ask me twice or tell me twice, and I finally did. And when I opened it, I remember her gently slapping my face and saying, "Don't ever speak to me like that." And I never did. It was a good lesson for me to learn. Shortly after that, I remember realizing that I had a pretty special mom. And we all called her Mom, but I had read somewhere or heard somewhere that the word mother was more respectful. And so I began calling her Mother. And it wasn't long before the rest of the family began calling her Mother also. And we all still call her Mother to this day, except for a few son-in-laws who call her George. I can remember as a child, Mother used to curl our hair, and we had long hair. And she curled it in some metal curlers that clamped shut. And it took a long time. And of course, any time is long for a child trying to hold still. But I can remember if we wiggled too much, she'd thump us on the head with the comb to get us to hold still. Jenna and I both remember that and laugh about it sometimes. Mother has always been a great listener. She's non-judgmental, and she gives advice only when asked. Mother doesn't like crowds and avoids being with large groups of people for very long. I have often heard Mother mention that occasionally she gets feelings of homesickness, and she thinks that this is homesickness for our premortal life, for our life with our loved ones who have passed on, and with our Heavenly Father and Mother. Mother has always had a testimony, and she has always been willing to serve in any church positions that she has been called to. Being the youngest child, I was accused of being spoiled, I'm sure. I probably was. I know that because of Mother going to school and going to work, that perhaps I had less of her time as a preteen and teenager. But there were some other advantages. We had survived, the other kids had survived through the Depression years and through the Second World War years and all of those kinds of things. And with Mother working and times being much better with the economy in our country, the style of life I lived as a teenager was different than that of my brothers and sisters. I remember that she did not come to many of my school events because of her working. But on the other hand, I remember going to buy prom dresses, and she didn't say you can have anyone in the store, but when it came right down to it, I really think she would have bought me anyone in the store. I know it was Mother's wages that helped me go to 2 years at BYU. I had a partial scholarship, but I appreciated the financial help that I was able to get that education, and also the lovely wedding that we had. Paul and I's reception was in Mother and Dad's backyard, and Dad had put in many, many, many hours getting the yard ready, and Mother was very generous with paying for the wedding. I remember one of the most significant things to me as a teenager was one time, and I think I was probably around 15 or 16, that Mom and Dad sat down with me and said that, and I was the only one left at home at that time, and they said that they had decided that we needed, the three of us, to decide together what was acceptable amount of social activities for me to be involved in, and what kinds of hours that I should be keeping, and those kinds of things. And so we discussed it for a while, and we kind of came to an agreement as to what would be a good guideline. And I can remember so distinctly Mother and Dad looking at me and saying, "You may govern yourself within these guidelines, but if we find that you cannot assume this responsibility. If you're not mature enough to handle it, then we will take the responsibility back and we will govern your hours and how often you go out. I don't think anything could have meant more to me as a teenager than to trust me to be my own, to be responsible for my own social activities. And had they told me to be home at midnight, I might have come in at 12:15. But because I said I would be home at midnight, I was there at midnight. It gave me a great deal of responsibility, but I admired their trust. I remember many times throughout my life as I would be tempted to do things that were not right, thinking, what would my mother think? I don't ever remember her expressing her disappointment in me, but I do remember being conscious of her expecting me to live the kind of life that she had taught. Mother's Home here in Lehigh has been such a great rest stop for my children the last 10 or 12 years. We live 5 miles outside of town, and the schools and all the activities are here in town close to Mother's Home. We have so enjoyed and appreciated being able to stop here, to make this our meeting place, to make this our place for snacks or restroom stops or a shoulder to cry on or whatever else that we needed. And it's been very nice to have Warren's lovely home and mother here, to have my children spend this special time with her. I consider Mother to be my best friend. My patriarchal blessing says that my parents were among my circle of friends in pre-existence, and that I rejoiced as I saw them come here to Earth, and looked forward and longed for the time that I could join them. I have truly been blessed with goodly parents, and am very grateful for Mother and for the life that she has lived, for the things that she has taught me, and for the many good characteristics that I have inherited from her.
Okay. I'm Luann, and I was the first daughter born. After 3 boys, I was born in December the 20th, and Mother and Dad were really thrilled to have a little girl. Mother was in bed for like 10 days at that time. They kept him down, and Daddy did all the Christmas shopping that year for the boys. He went to Salt Lake and did the Santa Claus things. Mother has related all this to me. And he gave Mother $10 for Christmas. And he said, now after you're up and feeling well, you can go buy yourself a dress and a pair of shoes. And I said, a dress and a pair of shoes for $10? And she said, I did. A nice dress and a pair of shoes, and had money left over. Now Dad he'd have been still quite a young man, wouldn't he, at this time? They started out, Mother already had a child. They had 2 more boys within about 3 years, and then here I came along, and so within I'd say their first 5 or 6 years of marriage, they had quite a family. During the Depression, a lot of responsibility. And I think back now at young men at that age, and how many would take all that responsibility. So I think my father was a pretty mature man at an early age. And the first memories that I have of Daddy, and I can't even tell you, even how old I was. But I guess he thought that I was just okay having a daughter because when he was home, I was by his side all the time. Uh, I would I would take a tantrum if he left to go somewhere without me. Mother says that one time I run down the middle of the highway after him in a car because he was going someplace without me, but he usually didn't. He'd take me when he'd get a haircut, he'd take me to the store, he'd take me down. There was a place called Dee's that we would walk to. It was a place where the guys could go have a beer, and lots of times he'd go have a beer, and I'd sit up on the stool and have a knee-high orange. And I mean, it was just this was how we were raised. It was a fun thing. And I remember him taking me down to what they called the river, where his cousins lived, the colleges, and they'd always tease me about cutting off one of my long curls, and I can remember shying around his leg. To me, he was a giant, and he was a big man. But there are just memories like this. And when Mother would discipline me or get after me, Dad would comfort me. Never mind, we'll go buy you an ice cream or something, So I can remember getting up early in the mornings before daylight. We had a cow, and I didn't want him to go out to milk without me. I'd go out to milk the cow with him, and he'd take the milk bucket in one hand. We'd go to the granary, get a scoop of grain in a bucket. Then he'd stick his little finger down, and I'd hold on to that, and go out and milk the cow. So there's just lots of things as a very young child that I remember of him. I remember him when he'd go hunting, and he'd bring home the pheasants and things, and I'd help him pluck ducks and do things like that. These are things that I'm sure the kids nowadays wouldn't even relate to, He raised all of our meat. He did the butchering, and when he'd kill chickens or anything like that, I'd of course want to be involved in it, and he'd wait till after the killing was done, and he'd make me stay at the house, and then after that he'd say, okay, you can come and help or watch or whatever I did, But he was, like I say, to me he was a giant of a man, but he was so gentle. Just a real gentle person. And then as I got older, we still had this rapport, but as I got older and entered teenage years, difficult years, where I related better to my mom than my dad at that time, and we became not distant, but we just didn't relate well until after I was married, and then we became fast friends again. I can remember times and the boys can help me with this, when he'd come home from work on a hot summer day, and he'd gather us kids, even the neighbor kids, whoever wanted to go, and we'd go to the canal swimming because the water was cool, and that's where I learned to swim, and I'm sure that's where the boys learned to swim. But they're just those kinds of memories. And like I said, I can't even I just don't even know when they began. I can't tell you if I was 2 or 3 or 4, or even how old I was. But during my teenage years, when I had friends girlfriends and things, he always made them feel so welcome, and he just really enjoyed the friends and things that went on that way. I could always count on him if I needed a ride any place, no matter where I was or anything. I could always count on him. I'd call and he'd come get me, or he'd take me. He was always very, very supportive that way. But we had some really fun times as little children, didn't we? We always went Eastering, someplace. He always took us out Eastering, and It was big family outings. We'd go to the lake and fish, sometimes all night fishing, when you could fish all night long, and they'd burn tires. Oh, God, we'd come home just black like Indians. We just had the funnest childhood, and like I said, during Depression years, we just really didn't have much. During the war years, when things were rationed, sugar was rationed and shoes were rationed, and you could only have maybe 2 pairs of shoes a year or something. We always went around with these little scuffed out shoes, and Dad had, oh, what did they call those? You put our shoes over this little shoe.
Elastic stand.
Yeah, and he'd repair our shoes. Yeah.
I can remember during those war years that we couldn't get Wrigley's chewing gum either.
No,
And
or bubble gum.
I can remember how fortunate we was and how we felt when we finally got some after the war.
Yeah, I could remember how when we'd get bubble gum, the store would get just a little bit, and we'd all run the store for bubble gum, and we'd chew it for days till it was gray.
Yeah, I can remember at school, somebody would get the word and say, "Hey, Larson's has got some Wrigley's." Boy, we'd make a beeline down there.
And they wouldn't have it out in the open.
No.
You'd have it
Oh,
down
no.
in the drawer. You'd have to go ask for it. They'd ration out. They'd only sell you one.
Yeah.
And as a matter of fact, I can remember it was kind of a game. You hadn't long, and you start seeing a few wrappers around on the ground, and it was.
Yeah, that was your
It was
clue.
unusual. It was a clue. It was something else.
Yeah.
It was something really
Yeah.
unusual.
I can remember gas was rationed during the war years too, and I can't remember if you boys played this with, or who I played with in the neighborhood or what, but we'd get an old tire, a discarded tire. We'd push that around, playing that was our automobile. And then we'd make these paper stamps up, and we'd go to the service station and give them the stamps for the gas. You guys probably didn't do that,
But I can remember the rationing and things very difficult to get. Sugar, gasoline, shoes. Those are things that you just couldn't buy. They just weren't available.
and Dad and Mom were really innovative and really managed well.
And we were raised during the Depression, and I don't remember ever feeling that we went without.
We're deprived.
No, deprived of anything. We didn't.
Nobody had anything to compare it by.
Everybody was in the same boat.
Everybody was in the same boat.
There wasn't anything to compare it to.
It was hand-me-down clothes, and I can remember for years wearing overalls, and of course being patched and ripped, but it was just always something to eat, basically because we raised a lot of our own food. We'd have a cow, we had plenty of milk. I'd never drink water. I'd always go to the fridge, and ice cold milk is what I, and still love to drink milk. And they, of course, he had chickens, so we'd have eggs, pigs, all of the leftovers, food, stuff like that, slop, swill we'd take for the pigs, and he would probably working for foxes be able to get some grain to when it got to the point to really fatten them up, and he raised good animals, and
He did. He was a good butcher.
and then slaughter them, butcher them, and have some of it cured, but not very much. Most of it was just fresh pork. Then, of course, occasionally cows would have calves, and you'd have a steer, and he would butcher that after it had been raised for a while. Then we grew corn, potatoes. We had
You kids had
blackberry patch.
Yeah, you guys had
Or
picked.
dewberry patch is what it was. And he would raise, I remember him raising cucumbers just out the east of the house, probably about a 2-acre piece. And he'd have some of the neighbors and some of our relatives, the colleges, the Barnharts would come and pick cucumbers and course, they'd have a lot of fun teasing us kids, and I remember I loved to eat cucumbers. I just take them, peel them with my teeth and eat them, and they used to really get around to get me to eat those. They made a lot of fun doing that. And of course, with having the farm, there was always work to do. And what I remember an awful lot about Dad was the admiration that other people had for how good a worker he was. He was not fast, quick, working to do things, but he was slow, not real slow, but steady, and pace himself, and he could just
Go on and
on.
on and on.
Remember it hauling hay or piling hay, cleaning ditches, and of course these are things that he included us with when we were very small, and I remember first working right alongside with him till he taught us, and as we got a little older, then these were some of the responsibilities we would have to clean the ditches around the place, to weed the gardens, and I have just a lot of praise for that. I had a great effect on my work ethics, and appreciate him very much for that.
I have a letter here that I wrote to Mother that was suggested by Jenna at her birthday 2 or 3 years back, and I'd like to read it because it expresses a lot of my memories and my relationship with Mother. Dear Mother, what a good idea Jenna came up with writing these letters to help celebrate your birthday. Sometimes it's easier to express our feelings in a letter such as this. As I have gotten older, I sure have come to a realization how fortunate I am to have you and Dad for parents. I am so grateful for all the things you have done for me and the many sacrifices you have made. As I think back on my early childhood, I think of all those fun things we used to do as a family. I remember the Sundays down at Grandma and Grandpa Manning's, playing with all of our cousins in Grandpa's sheds and chicken coops. That was a wonderful experience to have that close relationship with our relatives. I remember those cold winter nights when we used to play card games and Monopoly and put puzzles together. I remember Grandma Udell in that old rocker with one of us kids on her lap and 2 others on the arms of the rocker, sitting in front of our old coal heater telling us stories about growing up in Kanab. I remember the popcorn, fudge, and divinity we used to make to have as treats on those nights. In those days, every night was family home evening. Then at the conclusion of these fun nights, I remember going to bed with Grandma Udell and how I loved to get my hands in her hair. Most of the time she would have it up in braids with a bun, and I would have to take out all those hairpins and undo the braids so I could feel her long hair. What a feeling of comfort and security it gave me. Then there was our camping trips up to the creek in American Fork Canyon on Easter. I remember going out to the clay beds with Uncle Wilf and Aunt Lesta for Easter picnics. I remember Dad taking us out to Scranton gathering pine nuts. Then there were the nights we used to spend out to Utah Lake fishing for catfish. I remember going up to the Highland Canal for a swim during those hot days of summer. We sure did a lot of fun things in those days, and the thing that was most special about them was we did them as a family. I sure appreciate all those hunting trips Dad used to take. Those trips to West Canyon for deer, out to the clay beds for cottontails, and down in the fields along the Jordan River to hunt pheasants and ducks. Dad not only taught us to be good hunters, he taught us how to care for the game after we killed it. I can't think of those hunting trips without thinking of Uncle Sid. What a joy he was to be around. Mother, I want you to know how much I appreciate you going to work at the hospital to make it possible for me to go on my mission. I know that must have been a big adjustment for you at that time. Although I'm sure it must have been hard at the time, little did we all realize the many doors and opportunities it opened for you to help prepare you for what was yet to come. Because of that job, helping out at times with the patients, it created desire for you to go to school and become a nurse. This was another big adjustment for you because of your lack of formal education and the amount of time you had been away from it. I was sure proud of you the way you excelled in your classes in spite of these drawbacks. Because of this schooling, it created job opportunities for you at the training school, and because of your performance at your job, you earned more opportunities in supervisory and management positions. All these promotions made me so proud of you. Because of these experiences and opportunities, it has better prepared you to cope with the disappointments in your life of losing 2 mates. It has also prepared you for going on a mission, working at the temple and in the extraction program. All these things that are such a blessing in your life at this time. Mother, I want to thank you for your love and support when I was going through my divorce. That was a most difficult time for both of us, losing Dad and all. I appreciate you standing by me when I wasn't living the way I should have been. Thank you for helping me through a most difficult time. I appreciate very much all the things you have done for me. Thank you for the fine example you have always been to me, and also the spiritual strength you are to me. I want you to know that Bonnie loves and appreciates you as I do. I am sure proud to be your son. My love always, Jay.
Yeah, he's not.
Very good, Jay. There's a couple of thoughts. One about Father, about Dad, I'd like to express. That was his interest in athletics, in sports. I can remember when I was very young going to softball games. I don't remember ever seeing him play, but I remember going down and watching them play. I can remember that he followed us through all of our athletics, whether it was for the high school or playing softball for the board or whatever. I remember him taking us to baseball games up at Dirks Field. I remember going to basketball games at Lehigh High School. And, I have him to thank for one of my great interests in life, and that's sports and athletics. I remember when we were kids, we would be out behind the cellar, out in that open space between the cellar and the coops, and we'd be playing softball, hitting the ball, and he'd come out and let me hit one, and we knew how well I could hit, and he says, I'll even hit left-handed this time, left-handed. And he would hit it, and it'd go clear out way over the coops, clear out in the back field. And I didn't know at that time, found out later that he was a natural left-hand batter. And they used to make fun of him when he was growing up, that, oh, you can't hit, you're not a good hitter if you hit left-handed. So he changed and would hit right-handed. He was actually a switch hitter. He'd hit either left-handed or right-handed equally well.
Became a valuable player when he played with the city team.
He was. I don't remember ever seeing him play. I remember others, relatives, people in town, the Barneses, colleges that would tell of the type player he was. But he supported us. I remember him when I was playing baseball for the city team, just following us and supporting us all the time. Another thought I had, it's kind of come from what Laura talked about, how Mom and Dad sit down and outline some parameters I don't remember them ever doing that with me. However, it was the same philosophy. They were great examples. They've talked of their hospitality, of getting along with people, relating well to people. Later in life, well, most all the time, but especially Mother, very stalwart. Her testimony in the church, her encouraging us, teaching us. I don't remember any formal sitting down and teaching, but it was by example, and the way they just point out to us, this is the right way, this is not the right way. I always knew what was right and what was wrong, but I didn't always do it. And I felt that I always had the freedom to do just about what I wanted to do. But I also knew limitations. I knew that I would be in trouble, and especially the influence that Mother had on me, that I did not. Of course, there were many times I did things I wasn't supposed to, and there was never a time that I would think of how it would be hurting her if she knew. But many times it helped me to avoid situations and doing things that I shouldn't have. And yet, I never remember being harshly punished by either one of my parents. I remember one time, I don't even remember what it was for, Dad was going to give me a whipping, and I had to take his pocket knife and go out and cut the willow, the branch, and I went out in the apple tree and cut a branch. I didn't cut a very big one because I didn't want to be hurt very badly. But I can remember I cried and bawled. I don't know how long it took me. It seemed like it took me forever to cut that branch out of the tree. I don't remember the whipping at all. I don't remember. I don't believe he hit me very hard. But
Was the
it was that
anticipation
waiting for it and
punishing
anticipation. And that's the only time I remember getting a licking from Father. And Mother, I can remember some slaps to the side of the head and cuffs, slaps, but never was I afraid of being whipped or being it. It was mostly that it was her disapproval and how it would hurt her. I remember one time I had missed mutual or something, and they gave out the Scout Awards, and it was my second class Scout badge. So we were coming home, and I will stop by, his name was Lon Roundy, our Scoutmaster. I'll stop by and get my second class Scout badge, which I did, and pinned it on me. And then I know I was with Roy Turner, and I think Jay might have been there, and Roy had stolen some cigarettes from his father. We had to try him. And I had some gum, got that in my mouth and chewed it and went home. Of course, when I walked in the door and Mother saw my second class badge, very proud of me as she was. Anything we accomplished, she never boast or bragged about us, but you knew that she appreciated what you did, and that she was proud of you. Come out, put her arms around me, and gave me a kiss. She backed away and looked at me and says, "Neil, I think you better go to bed." And I don't know who was there. There was someone in the house, could have been relatives, and did nothing to embarrass me, but of course, I was very hurt, mostly because of how disappointed she would be in me. And this is the way we were disciplined. Reminds me, I think it was Brigham Young when he was asked, how do you get these Mormons to behave or to do the things they do? He said, we just teach them the correct principles and they follow them. And that's what I remember about the discipline and the teaching, the behavior I learned from my parents, which I appreciate very much.
That really is the truth. We were taught by example. There was never any violent acts in our family of discipline that I ever remember. We were taught to, like Neil said and like Laura said, we were taught right and wrong, and we were taught to take the responsibility for our own actions. And I think that by the time Laura came along, my mom and dad got a little more sophisticated in the way they were teaching, but we lived by the same principles as older children did. Uh, we knew that we knew right from wrong. We also know that we had the choice to choose right from wrong, and that we'd have to take ownership of the wrong choice. And that in itself was the punishment, the disappointment we saw in our parents' eyes, in their actions. That was the punishment. Laura talked about how well dressed her and Jenna were, and they were, because Mother was such a beautiful seamstress. And by the time they came along, it was a little easier. Finances were a little easier. But I have to tell you that when I grew up, I was very well dressed with very little means. She would make over coats that were grandmother's or hers for me. She'd make over, I remember Uncle Sid's wife, Aunt June, they had got married recently. I was about 6th or 7th grade. And she gave Mother a bunch of clothes that she had, and Mother made all those over for me, made them to fit me, and in modern styles and things, up-to-date styles. And I was always dressed very well, but it wasn't brand new stuff usually. But by the time I got married, Mom and Dad went all out. I had a beautiful wedding, and Dad was very supportive of it. And when it came to prom dresses and senior hop dresses and that kind of thing, why, she'd take me shopping, and, it was like Laura said, she didn't say you can have anything you want, but I knew that if there was something that I really wanted, I probably could have it, So I don't know where they came up with some of the means. There's a couple of things that I had written when Jay did to Mother that I would like to reiterate. Maybe I will read this. And this was to Mother. Dear Mother, when Jenna suggested that we make your 75th birthday a little more of a special occasion by jotting down some of fond memories, I began to think of all the things I'd like to say to you, and realized that not only would it take volumes to tell you everything that has surfaced in my mind, but also someone with expertise in effective composition. So please bear with me as I try to express myself and touch on a few of the things that mean so much to me. I would like to thank you and tell you how very much I appreciate my rearing and upbringing, the values you have taught me, and the example you have set forth. Without these values, I am sure I would not be able to endure some of the hardships and disappointments life holds in store for us. You have taught me responsibility, independence, and given me self-confidence to see these things through. I especially want you to know how much I value your infinite wisdom. When I need advice, I can always count on you for a good, sound, unbiased opinion of most any situation or problem. And even though I may not always follow your counsel, I have never felt that it was in any way wrong. I consider you to be, along with my husband, my best friend and confidant. I know that I can come to you with any kind of a problem or concern, no matter how copious or dreadful it may seem. I will be welcomed with open arms and love and understanding without ever being criticized, neither personally or to anyone else. I also would like you to know how much you are thought of by others. Working where you worked for so many years, I have an unequaled advantage of encountering so many of the people who have come to know you. Never, I am sure, is there a week that goes by that I don't have someone inquire about you. How is your mother doing? I just love her, or she sure is a special person. No one could be more proud to be your daughter than I. You have always made me feel that I was a very special part of the family, especially when you remind me, as you often do, how much of a delight I was to you and Dad, being born the first girl after 3 boys. You have always been there in my time of need and have supported me in everything. Some of the times when this meant the most were during my teenage years, when you realized how important peers, fads, clothes, etc. were to a girl that age. Even to the point that you supported a lot of things that our family could not afford, like paying the extra expense of having a girlfriend accompany me on a vacation, so I could enjoy the companionship of another teenager and not become quote-unquote bored. These things were done in a way, though I'm not quite sure how, that although I got special consideration at times, I was not to expect it all of my life. When the time came for me to become an adult and rear my own family, I was to be responsible, independent, and selfless. You have stood by me and supported me in rearing my family and dealing with marital and family problems as they have occurred over the years. For this I am truly grateful. As my life goes along, even though I am feeling peace and content at this time, I know you are there to help me and support me should the need arise. Thank you for the exemplary life you have lived. Through example, you have helped teach me the concepts of tolerance, patience, understanding, and respect for others. I am, of course, constantly working on these attributes, but hopefully I will become as skilled in them as you. Your examples of being energetic, creative, and motivated are a constant inspiration to me. And through these concepts, I have found self-worth and much enjoyment and happiness. Thank you for these things and the many others I have not mentioned at this time. Please know, dear Mother, that I love and appreciate you, and I pray that your life can continue in good health and happiness.
I'd like to really express appreciation to Mom and Dad, the importance of closeness of family. Jay mentioned a little bit about how much time we spent down to Grandpa and Grandpa Manning's. And it was not only that, but it was with other of our aunts and uncles, not only on Dad's side, but there's Uncle Dean and Aunt Helen that lived right next to us. We spent a lot of time. There's both on Mother's side and Dad's side of the family. That's who we associate with our cousins, with our aunts and our uncles. The many good times we had with them. I can remember the college reunions that we used to go to. We'd look forward to them. That, of course, is Grandma Manning's family background, and is the colleges. Then, of course, in our later years, it's been the Manning reunion. There's kind of separated now down to just Grandpa and Grandma Manning's, and even talk now of just having one for a reunion for my mother and Dad's family. The getting together at Christmas time with the entire family, the getting together of brothers and sisters as we go down to Lake Powell, as we meet in different places, birthdays. These are special times and things that I have tried just to follow and want to follow with my own family. I appreciate very much my parents teaching me.
Do you remember what a great vegetable garden Dad always raised? Did you ever have to help him plant potatoes? He'd put in the shovel and you'd have to slip the potato down in the dirt?
Yes, and I'd always get it with the eyes going down, and the eyes were supposed to come up.
And
Yes. And then the corn, 3 to every little pile for
yes.
the corn.
Yes, you had to put 3, and if you you didn't get the potato in or the corn in fast enough, it was too late.
Right.
He always grew a really, really excellent garden, though. Dad was very good at raising vegetables. And do you remember when he used to kill the chickens? And then cut their heads off, and they'd still be running around flipping blood, and we'd go, ew, ew.
Awful.
Awful.
And then dip it in that hot water. Remember that awful
Stink.
smell?
Yes, I can still remember that smell. sometimes, what was it they do with the pigs when he'd kill them? They'd have to singe them or something.
I think that, yeah, singe them and then scald them and scrape them a lot. It seemed like it went on all day.
All day.
Didn't it?
Mhm.
And
And
we were never allowed to be there when he slaughtered it.
No.
It was only
I was there once though when he killed beef.
Were you?
Uh-huh.
I
Yeah, he
wasn't.
hung it in the tree just as, you'd cross over the irrigation ditch to go out by the barn. I remember it hanging in that tree. I remember him eating the tongue after.
Yeah.
I mean, after it was cooked.
Not right there.
Yeah, not right there. Anyway, and he raised rabbits and we ate those and
Remember the pig that became his pet?
no.
You don't?
No.
Oh, there was one pig that was just a little runt, and so he had to bring it in and put it by the coal stove to keep it warm, and it became his pet.
Oh.
So after he sold all the others off, then he was going to keep this one till it was big enough. Well, it would follow him all over the yard while he did the chickens and
whatever.
everything. So when it come time for it to be slaughtered, I don't think it got slaughtered. I think it got traded or something.
It was given to someone else to slaughter.
It was like a pet.
Well, and Mother would take the pork rinds and she'd cook them in the oven, render the lard out, and
Make crackles.
make cracklings. Yeah. And then what were those other things that we'd make with the lining and put meat in them and wrap them up? What were those called?
Oh, I want to call them faggots, but I know that's what.
They probably were.
Something like that. Anyway, it was the ground up liver and then sage and
spices.
and what all. It
And it
tasted awful, but it looked
kind
pretty.
of like a spider web.
Yeah.
The stuff they wrapped it with plastic filling in the sections. Yeah, and I did never eat them. I know I did never.
No,
eat
that
them.
was too.
Which reminds me, I always used to sit next to Dad at the table, and being the youngest of the family, I'm sure that I don't know whether the rest of you got away with this, but I always sat next to him, and whatever I didn't want to eat, vegetables, whatever, I'd just slip over onto his plate and he'd eat it, and Mother'd never pick up on it. And I mean, I could eat all the frosting off my cake and slip the cake over on his plate, and he just.
Especially ones with the raisins in.
Yes. Oh yeah. And the raisins I'd pick out of Mother's raisin cookies, and he'd eat them, never say a thing.
Oh, but he and they'd pass all of the bones down to us, and we'd clean all the bones.
And I mean clean.
Clean the bones.
Yes. Ate the knuckles on the drumsticks, everything, until it was a bone that looked like it had been dried on the desert for 20 years.
Do you remember, sitting at that kitchen table, do you remember when Sam hung himself?
Oh, yes. I came in and, I told Dad that dog was going to hang himself because he was such an idiot dog. And I just walked in and said, well, Dad, I told you. And he did. Sam hung himself. No feeling whatsoever.
This dog, it would be on a leash and probably an 8-foot fence at least.
It was a chicken wire fence.
Chicken wire.
But he would climb it.
He'd climb it.
He would climb it.
Up and
So Dad had him on a chain inside of the pen, so it wasn't an obnoxious dog. I hated him.
Oh, I know, he was ugly,
He
too.
tripped me with his chain every time I went in there to feed him.
It was a Weimaraner or something
Yes,
like
it
that.
was a Weimaraner. Oh. Anyway, Sam hung himself, and I didn't even care, obviously.
No tears shed.
Do you remember that big stack of ammo boxes that Dad had?
Yes.
And we built playhouses with
yeah.
those, and
oh, that's
we could
right.
construct the
big
neatest
cotton
houses.
tree.
Uh-huh.
Cottonwood tree.
Yeah.
Yes, that was neat.
That parking lot was an interesting place. I remember one day, of course, when we were growing up, I think Dad was the night watchman during the times I can remember, so I don't remember Dad being real athletic like the boys do. But I do remember, I don't know whether you were there, but there were kids from the neighborhood, and we were out back playing baseball in that parking lot area. And Dad kind of limped out with his arthritis, and he says, let me hit one. And we thought, oh okay,
sure.
Passed by the old man. And and they pitched him, he says, he got ready to swing, and then he says, oh, I'll do it left-handed. So he goes toward the other side of the plate, and they pitch him, Kay Fox or somebody pitches him a ball, and he hits it, and it goes way out over the chicken coops and out into the garden, and I'm just going,
Oh my.
I can't believe this. I mean, I didn't,
Didn't see
didn't
him as
have
an
an
athlete.
idea
We didn't
that
remember
Dad
him,
had been such an athlete, such a
Yeah.
fantastic baseball player.
Do you remember when he would plow the big alfalfa field and would walk with him over to Uncle Lester's and get the big plow horses?
No,
Remember that?
I
Oh.
don't.
He'd go over and borrow, well, I think it was just the one plow horse, but he'd get that on the old plow, and sometimes he'd let us ride it, and we thought we were something up on that big plow horse. And it was so huge. I mean, great like this. By the time we were done, we could hardly walk. We'd be sore for days, but that was so fun. Every spring I just couldn't wait till we'd go get the plow horses, and like I say, sometimes he'd let us, and sometimes he wouldn't let us ride, I guess, depending on
Remember him,
how busy he was.
Remember him squirting us if we'd go out while he was milking the cow?
Oh, yes.
Squirt us with the warm milk.
Yeah.
I remember too when Shay was on his mission, Dad was taking care of that buckskin horse of his, and Dad would come home tired or something, and he'd say, "Would you go throw that horse a leaf of hay?" And I thought, what is a leaf of hay?
What is a leaf of hay?
You know, just a leaf of hay. But he meant just so much of a bale of hay by a leaf of hay, and we were supposed to know exactly what that was.
I can see me just picking out one little leaf.
Yeah. At first, thought that's what it would be. Do you remember when I guess he got a ride to work sometimes at General Refractories, and they'd drop him off at the bottom of the driveway, and he'd be walking up with that black lunchbox. In fact, I still have that. And he'd always have a treat in it for us.
Yeah, he'd always say.
We'd run down the bottom of the lane to meet him and walk up with him, and he'd always
share the treat.
have some little treat in there for us.
That's right.
It was fun.
I remember one time we were walking down to Uncle Lester's, and I guess we must have seen some quail in the field on the way. And I don't know how it happened, but then when we got back home, he must have said something about he had seen Heber on the way, and Heber was the man that he worked with.
Oh, yes, Heber Hadfield at the brick plant.
And so somehow in my little mind, when he told Mom he'd seen Heber, I thought he meant the quail, because after that I always called these little birds little Hebers.
Little Hebers.
Little Hebers. And Mom couldn't imagine how
Why
I
you
got
would call
that.
them little
And I
Hebers.
couldn't imagine what they were talking about when they talked about quail. They were little Hebers to me. So they're still little Hebers to me when I see them.
When you see them. Well, that's fun. I don't ever remember Dad saying in words, "I love you," but I always knew
Oh, yeah.
that he loved me.
Do you remember?
He showed it.
I can still feel it. He always, when he walked with us, he always walked hand in hand. And I remember I had kind of a little, I guess it was a little wart or something, and he'd walk hand in hand and pick at that little wart. But I can still, he always walked hand in hand. He didn't just drag us along behind.
I think he used to pick at our scabs as much as we picked at him.
Yeah, they were just there
He
while
liked
we
to
were
pick.
walking.
Yeah, that's true. Oh, and the funny things that he ate, I think that the rest of the family's already talked about, the tongue and the liver and the heart and all of that. But do you remember how he used to fix a bowl full of lettuce and put milk on it and sugar on it?
I don't remember that.
Just
Really?
like we would eat cold cereal today.
Oh,
He
my
put,
heavens.
and then his eggs. I mean, the whites were still half runny.
Clear.
Right. I mean, it was just like barely cooked, this egg. In fact, I don't think it was even warm yet when he'd eat them. Oh, fun memories.
Yes, good
And
memories.
He'd bring home ducks and geese and pluck the down so Mother could make pillows. Right there in the kitchen, I can remember
Right.
that one chair right between the laundry room and the bathroom. He'd sit right there and pluck those feathers out of those ducks and geese and save them.
I remember one night I had a really bad earache, and so Mother had a heating device all fixed up for me with I know it was an oatmeal box.
It was an oatmeal box,
with
a light
a
globe.
light in it to keep
It was
my.
a light globe.
But I was so excited because he was cleaning the chickens, and I wanted to watch. So I'd run out and watch a little while, and then I'd go back in and put the heat on.
There must have been a bad flu around there. I can remember that same thing. The heat that was on our ears while we had those terrible earaches.
See, Mother was a nurse before she was even a nurse.
Yes, that's true.
Do you remember when she?
Every mother is.
Yes. Do you remember when she was in training for her nursing, and she'd practice everything on us? Practice making the bed with us in it, and slings and all that. Remember, we'd get her book and thumb through the pages and see when she was coming to shots.
Yes. And then she brought an orange. She would practice doing the shots on an orange.
But we didn't know that. We thought we were going to be practicing on it, so we were hiding.
I do remember, though, when it came to part of puberty, she brought the books home and sat me down, made an appointment with me and sat me down to teach me all about the birds and the bees and, what was going to be happening to me and everything. And I just thought, what an interruption of a fun summer day. This was boring.
Right.
And I really
don't remember
didn't
that part.
appreciate it.
Maybe
But when she was
maybe
that
I
part of her
experienced
training, I got that.
Well, that was good. That was. You needed it.
Yeah. Did Dad ever, when I was old enough to go out on dates and things, I remember Dad would always say, the young man I was going out with, before I'd leave, he'd say,
well, now who are his parents? And I think, I don't know who his parents are. I think they live down such and such, and he'd think and kind of try to put together. Finally, after about the third or fourth time of that, the next time he asked me, well, who are his parents? I said, Dad, I am not going out with his parents. Dad didn't think that was very funny.
No, he didn't know who the parents were.
Right,
The whole thing.
right.
Yeah. I remember there was a young man at the service station that was getting interested in me before I was old enough. And I was really flattered by it, of course. And then I found out that Dad had had a talk with him. And I was so mad. I didn't talk to him for a month, it seemed like. How dare he?
Interfere with your
probably
little...
only 12 at the time, but
someone had a crush on you and he intervened.
That's right.
Mm-hmm.
How dare he? And I'm sure he was gentle enough about it.
But he put that kid straight.
Yeah, he didn't bother me after that, I noticed.
Did you ever go down to Dee's beer parlor with Dad?
Uh-huh. And
I
have a
too.
root beer.
Yes. Yes.
Sit up on the stool and
Mhm.
have a root beer.
Right. And you know, that was typical of Dad. He could associate with all kinds, accepted everyone
Yeah.
for what they were.
Yeah,
It didn't bother him. You know, it would not even bother him to be seen coming out of the beer joint because he was confident of who he was and what he stood for. I do remember, though, he always would buy me, you know, the large-size bottle of pop. You know, all the pop came in bottles in those days, and there were two sizes, but he'd always give me the big one, and I never wanted the big one. I never could drink very much soda pop. But it was because he wanted
That's right,
half
he
of
wanted the
mine.
rest.
He wanted his and half of mine.
So cold after you'd walk down there. Yeah, that was fun. I remember those big old bar stools. That was fun.
It was fun. I don't ever remember hearing Dad speak ill of anyone. He was always very positive about people. He never gossiped, never talked about people, never said anything negative about any person that I ever remember at all.
Neither.
And I think he had good reason to sometimes. But he didn't.
Oh, really?
He didn't. He really didn't.
Ken still tells the story about when it was after we were married, and Ken would go to the pool hall with his friends after school, and he remembers just looking up one time over the pool table, and here's Dad standing there, and
whoa!
And he just said to him, "Don't you think it's time we go home, son?" And Ken said, "I just walked out," and that's all that had to be said. He said, "I'll never forget that." He was just
very gentle about reprimanding him in a way.
Time we go home, son? That's cute.
Oh, that is cute.
Yes. A lot of good memories.
Really.
I remember when I was starting to want to drive, and so I thought I was real cool because I knew where he kept the extra set of keys, so I would sneak the car once in a while. But I didn't ever dare go very far. And then someone had told me if you go backwards, then it doesn't rack up the miles.
Speedometer, so he wouldn't catch it.
So I got to be a really good reverser.
Oh my gosh.
It wasn't easy coming up that lane either.
Was it that old 53 Chev? Is that what you were driving?
It was his little red truck.
Oh, it was his old red truck.
Little red truck.
Oh, I remember the first time.
See, because if he and Mom were gone somewhere, they'd be
That's
gone in
what
the
they
car.
would leave.
So then
That's
I could
true.
go in the
That's
truck,
true.
and I thought, surely he checks the miles, and so I got to back up really good.
Well.
Yeah.
I remember one time he went in for his regular routine yearly annual exam with general refractories, and they did a chest x-ray every time, and they developed it, and the doctor kind of just came out chuckling, and he says, "You've been eating pheasant lately?" And Dad said, "Yeah." And he says, "You still got a few BBs in your abdomen." They showed up right there in the x-ray. They hadn't passed on yet. I remember it was always, Dad was very conscious of us girls' financial well-being. And I can remember a lot of times when we'd come to visit you and Ken down in Provo, Dad would kind of wander around the house for a few minutes, and then he'd say, "I'm going for a ride," and he'd come home with 3 or 4 sacks of groceries and stick them in your refrigerator.
He'd always go to the fridge, not so that we could see it,
No.
but he'd go to the fridge and look in. And so I remember when we would get paid and go load up on groceries and load the fridge up, Ken would say, "Call your mom and dad and have them come over."
Wanted to see him when the fridge
Yeah,
was
he
full.
wanted him to see with the fridge full, but I know he did that with all of us. Yeah, bless his heart.
Yes, when Dad died, I said that's one thing that I think I'll really miss. There are just a few things your father cares for and no one else does, and that is your your financial well-being and whether your husband is taking good care of you.
That's
And
right.
and that's something that I thought no one will ever have that same feeling for me, that
Mhm.
same concern for
That's
me.
right. That's right.
Again, you know, now that Dad's gone. Cut. Well, I think we got through quite a bit.
Some of the fondest memories I have of it as a child with Mom was the quilting bees that she used to have at the house. I just remember that us kids would be under the quilt and the frames and all these ladies' knees all the way around, and it would just go on all day long. She'd fix lunch for all of them, and those were some really good times. Most of the people that came were some of the neighbors. I'm trying to think who I think that both the Bremses would come, and May Daly and a lot of the people from the ward, and then would take turns going to their houses too. But those were fun times for us kids, sitting under that quilt, watching them do the quilt. And then all of the sewing that Mom did at Christmas time, I just, to this day, just marvel that she was able to do all the doll sewing, the doll clothes, without us ever even having an inkling what she was doing. She'd go in the bedroom and close the door, and we knew that it was off limits to go in the bedroom, but we had no idea what was going on. But she could keep all the sewing scraps and everything. At least it never connected with me that's where the doll clothes came from. But I do know that's what she was doing. Then as we got a little older, and when Jay went on his mission and Mom went to work down at the old hospital, I remember going down there with her. She worked in the kitchen and cook meals for the patients, and I remember how fun it was to go down, and we'd help her put all the little jello dishes on the trays, or the pudding, or whatever they were having. And that was fun, and I remember it was quite a change in our lives when Mom went to work. Up until that time, we'd come home and walk up the lane and expect Mom to be there, and she always was with dinner ready. And then after that, we were old enough that we could start cooking, and most of our cooking lessons came from Dad because he was home, because being on shift work. And so I know the cooking that I learned more from him. I think other than the baking, learned that from Mom, of course, but the everyday cooking was from Dad. And I remember later, especially when I got married as young as I did, I was really grateful that for those times that I had to have to do that, or I wouldn't have known what to do with the cooking. And then the other most special thing that Mom did for all of us was to be there when our babies were born. And I don't know that we just knew she'd be there. I don't know, we never had to ask, or I don't think she even really had to tell us she'd be there. It was just one of those things we knew she'd be there, and it was just the tradition. She was always there to bathe the baby first and to take care of the rest of the family and whatever needed to be done. And I thought how special that was. I'd seen a lot of friends that didn't have that kind of care, and I thought how strange that was. I thought it come with every mother, and I'm glad it came with mine. Dad was born the sixth of 10 children to Harry William and Esther Ann College Manning on October 5th, 1909. His childhood was spent on a farm near the Jordan River, working and playing with his brothers and sisters, friends and relatives. That spot and the people associated with it is always had a fond place in his heart. While a child, if at any time he was missing from home, he could be found down at the river, fishing during the spring and summer, hunting ducks during fall and winter. Throughout his life, even though his family had moved, he would often return on a Sunday afternoon, or whenever a brother or a son were spending some time with him, he'd say, "Let's go down to the river." He loved to visit the place of his childhood and members of the college family still living there. Some of his fondest memories as a young man were of hunting with Uncle Tom College in West Canyon. Uncle Tom took him under his wing when Dad was in his early teens and taught him to hunt deer by tracking them. Later in his life, the deer hunt was the biggest event of the year, and as far as he was concerned, there was no place to hunt but West Canyon. Dad would take the boys hunting rabbits and deer. Dad was an excellent hunter and excellent shot. He never used anything but open iron sights on his rifles. Dad had a great reputation among all the hunters in his party. If anyone needed some venison, Hud Manning was the one to go hunting with. By the time the boys were old enough to hunt deer, Dad had switched spots in West Canyon and liked to hunt off that big blue rock that sits in the middle of the ridge in Fox Holler, about 3/4 of the way up. Many a nice buck were killed by him from this perch over the years. This rock became known as Hud's Rock by all who hunted in that part of the canyon, and today there is still a plaque permanently placed by our family in remembrance of all the good times and special hunts Dad gave the boys. Dad was just as good with a shotgun as he was with a rifle. Very seldom did he miss a pheasant or a duck. He knew his guns well and knew their limitations, and whenever he squeezed the trigger, you could give odds there would be meat in the pot. Dad was also fond of baseball, a love that he instilled in his boys from day one. He played left field on the Lehigh team in the old Central Utah League and was usually one of the league's leading hitters. He was a switch hitter, something unusual in those days. He started out while young, batting left-handed, but because his older brothers and friends made fun of him and said left-handers couldn't hit, he changed and could bat well either right or left-handed. Later, he liked to work with youth, teaching them how to play. Throughout his life, he followed Major League Baseball, his favorite team being the St. Louis Cardinals. We used to do a lot of things together as a family. Things were different then, and money was scarce. On a few occasions, we would maybe see a movie, but most of the time, especially in the winter, we just stayed home and did things with the family. Playing games, putting together puzzles, and hearing stories from Grandma Udell about her early years. There was usually a good treat of popcorn, homemade divinity and fudge, and hot chocolate. Dad also liked to take the boys to baseball games when possible. Dad was educated in the Lehigh schools, getting through the 10th grade, which was what was required then. In those days, men were expected to work and be self-sufficient as soon as possible. While living at the river, he would walk with his brothers and sisters, regardless of the weather, 3 miles to the New West School on Lehigh's Main Street. On cold winter mornings, he took about 1.5 hours, and that included stopovers at various homes on the way where they would stop to get warm. Dad was always a hard, conscientious worker and a good provider for us. In order to do this, he worked at various jobs. He worked in the Bingham copper mines, on road construction in American Fork Canyon, and for Lehigh City in the city recreation. He later filled in as an extra policeman for the city on a part-time basis. He helped with the construction of the brick plant and stayed on as a brick molder after it was built, becoming a watchman when his health failed. In all, he worked some 25 years at the brick plant. His co-workers referred to him as a machine for his physical strength and because there was never any wasted motion. As a molder, he put mud in steel molds and would compact them with a heavy steel paddle to form a specially shaped brick. The brick was then released by hand from the mold onto a tray that would go in the dryers. Phil Jensen, who worked with Dad, said no one could match him for productivity in hand molding. At home, Dad always enjoyed gardening. His vegetable gardens supplied food for his family, and he loved to give items from it to neighbors and relatives. His yard was always immaculate, and people would often drive by just to admire it and the flowers that he grew. Being with people, though, was probably Dad's greatest enjoyment. He just loved to visit and talk with people. He did all the grocery shopping and would sometimes make 2 or 3 trips into town in a day just so he could talk to different people he'd see on the streets or in the stores. Mother used to joke that it would take Dad several hours to go to town to pick up 3 items, and then he'd forget one of them intentionally, so he'd have to have an excuse to go to town again, just so he could visit. He always had a friendly word for everyone, child or adult. He never classified people, and everyone was comfortable around him. He could approach a perfect stranger, and within a few minutes you'd think they had known each other for years. When it came to his children, Dad always expressed his love in actions and treated their friends with respect. Dad wasn't a person that boasted about us kids and any of our accomplishments. He had a hang-up about people who did, but we always knew he was proud of us. Dad's church activities were many. He was an elders quorum president, genealogical chairman, Sunday school superintendent, member of the building fund committee, and a second counselor in the Lehigh 3rd Ward bishopric. He supported Jay's mission and at the time of his death was the high priest group leader of the Lehigh 7th Ward.
Most of my memories have to do with getting caught doing something wrong or with having to pull weeds in the carrot patch with rows that seemed 10 miles long. But I really have fond memories of growing up. Unfortunately, I didn't realize how much I appreciated HUD until I was about 20 years old. But I really do. My fondest memories of Mother involve when I was driving truck in my late teens. I would stop by the house on State Street sometimes and help Mother take clothes off the clotheslines. It didn't seem so at the time, but it was really special time for me because no one else was around and we got in a lot of conversation. She would often fix me a bowl of bread, thick cream, and raspberries. We got to talk alone, and I really appreciated that. Mother never wavered from her beliefs, and always gave us guidance. She always let us know what was right and that the church was always the way to go.
I just want to finish my history from the time that it was written before. I've been a widow for some years, and I have spent this time working at the temple for 13 years. 5 years of that I was a supervisor. I have also been at the extraction center, Spanish extraction center, and I still do that work. My greatest joy in life is my family. I am proud of my children, every one of them. I am proud of their accomplishments, proud of the wonderful people that they are. We have many times we get together. They had a party for me for my 80th birthday. We get together once a year for our Christmas party, and in between times at Memorial Day to go to cemetery. We have loving memories of our past. The greatest thing in life for me that I have always wanted, my goal, is to be a good LDS mother and have an eternal family, eternal companion and family. I'm proud of them all and love them all.